with Walker Wildman.
So who is responsible for the dysfunction in Washington? That's what we're going to be discussing today.
We have become one of the most litigious societies on the planet.
The goal of this show is to bring clarity to the news coming out of Washington, D.C., and to expose the deception that has plagued our nation's capital for decades.
Exposing Washington.
Each Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Central.
On American Family Radio.
Don't tell me, don't stop me in the middle. Don't you dare, not 1 second.
I resent that. No, I do not yield.
We have seen an economy that's skyrocketed and is good for all Americans.
Don't you dare talk to me like that.
Not just white Americans or not white Americans, but all Americans.
I resent that.
These are red, white, and blue issues.
No, I do not yield not 1 second to you. Not 1 second. Not 1 second.
If we can't get away from this divisive type of talk, we cannot come together as a nation.
I resent the remark about making America great again.
What the president's done, I believe, in this year plus is get more done against greater opposition than anyone I've seen in my lifetime.
Don't tell me that we don't understand.
The gentlelady will suspend.
Google Miss Waters and see what she's done in a lifetime.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome to a brand new broadcast of Focal Point on American Family Radio. It is the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio, and I am Brian Fisher, your congenial, convivial, amiable, and effervescent host, as always, as Jeff is quick to supply. So that is what we are about. Got a lot we're going to bring to you today, stacked and packed and locked and loaded. Going to have a special guest at 1:30 today in just 23 minutes, and that is senatorial candidate Chris McDaniel, running for the United States Senate in the state of Mississippi. We'll have him here in studio at 1:30. Now, before we get into all that stuff and content, I want to turn our attention to the Word of God. We're in a schedule you can find at using a schedule you can find at pray.afa.net. Now, this is, we covered the first half of John's account of the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead yesterday. And he deals with Martha. Martha was the one that was impulsive. She ran out to find Jesus. She grabs him. She says, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Jesus chats with her and asks her if she believes in him. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? If you believe in me, you'll never die. Do you believe this? And she said, yes, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. So with that, Jesus said, I want you to go get your sister. So she does. She called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now, Mary, remember, was the one that was more retiring. She was quieter. She was more contemplative. Martha was the doer, and Mary was the ponderer. She was the one that liked to think. Remember, she was the one that sat at the feet of Jesus while Martha was busy with all the preparations. And remember, Jesus said that you both done the right thing. I'm not going to take away what Mary has done because she has chosen the better part, which is to sit at my feet and learn from me. That's the character of Mary. So when Martha comes to her and says, the master is calling for you, she immediately jumps up and runs to greet him. She rose quickly, went to him. When Mary came to where Jesus was, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved. Literally, he was agitated. The verb means to exhibit irritation and anger. So Jesus was not only deeply troubled, he was deeply angered at what death was doing to God's people. And this is part of his mission, to remove the sting of death. And he was feeling it here himself because of his deep love for Lazarus and for Lazarus' sisters. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. The word for troubled means to be shaken, to be rattled. And so I think one of the things we learned from this, and this is an important thing to understand, that Jesus is not unmoved by our suffering. He is not unmoved in the presence of our suffering. Our pain pains him just like it pains us. It hurts him just as it hurts us. We tend to think of Jesus as somebody who is kind of stoic, who is detached, who can't be moved, who is in such control of his emotions that nothing ever touches him. But here we see that he was touched by the suffering of Mary and Martha. It moved him deeply, troubled him in his spirit. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So now he's weeping for the death of Lazarus, beyond the troubled and agitated stage to open weeping in his sympathy for Mary and Martha and for his own personal loss of Lazarus as a friend. The Jews said, "See how he loved him." Now Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone lay against it, just like the tomb of Jesus. They had these stones there, heavy stones, big stones, circular stones, oftentimes in a groove that could be rolled into place to keep grave robbers from coming, because these were caves. If you didn't have it blocked with a massive stone, anybody could go in there, and people were oftentimes buried with their valuables and other sentimental items, and so they became tempting targets for thieves. Jesus said, "Take away the stone," and Martha, ever the practical one, said, "By this time, Lord, don't do this, because by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." Now the King James says quite abruptly, "By this time he stinketh, for he stinketh in himself." Sometimes you just cannot improve on the good old King James. But remember, in Jewish theology, the spirit left after 3 days, and that's why the decay of the body began. So by the 4th day, they all understood that the body was going to begin to decay and it was going to begin to smell. And that's why Jesus waited the 2 extra days. He wanted to come until every last bit of possible hope was gone. So he says, Jesus says, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they, and it took a bunch of them to move the stone, Jesus lifted up his eyes with the stone rolled away and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." He wanted everybody to know that this was being done by the power of God that was being released through him. Remember, did the same thing when he fed the 5,000, lifted his eyes to heaven. Look, I am doing this at the behest of my Father. This is his power that is at work through me as his vessel. "I knew," he says to Father, "that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When he said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, his face wrapped with a cloth. Good thing he said, "Lazarus, come out," or would have emptied the entire cemetery. So Jesus says to them, "Look, unbind him and let him go." Now, the main, I think, takeaway from this is to understand the depth of the compassion of the Lord Jesus for us. We may not even think the Father's very compassionate, again, thinking they're kind of stoic and unmoved. But Jesus, we see twice in this passage, he wept. He was moved by their pain and by their suffering. He hurt with them. That's what the word sympathy means. It means to hurt with, to feel pain and suffering with. So when we come to Christ in prayer, we're not coming to someone who cannot be touched by our infirmities. Well, let's go to prayer. Lord Jesus, we accept and affirm the truth that you raised Lazarus from the dead. He had been in the tomb for 4 days, yet with just a spoken word, you commanded him to come out, and he did. Lord, we believe that you are the resurrection and the life, and that he who believes in you will live even though he dies. I claim for me, for my family, for the listening audience of Focal Point, for every man, woman, and child in this land, for our elected officials, for our president, President Trump. I claim your promise that whoever lives and believes in you will never die. You are the Christ, the Son of God. We affirm your humanity as it is revealed here. You were deeply moved in your spirit and troubled over the death of Lazarus. You loved him and wept over his death. We take heart from this to believe that you are a compassionate Savior and Lord, and that you weep with us when we weep. We are grateful that you are not a remote Savior who cannot be touched.
Nearly
by our
1 in
infirmities.
4 pregnancies in America will end in abortion. The Ministry of Preborn provides free ultrasounds for abortion-minded women throughout America. When a mother sees her baby on an ultrasound and hears the baby's heartbeat, she's 80% more likely to keep her baby.
They introduced me to my child for the first time through an ultrasound. I was able to see this life growing inside of me, hear the heartbeat, and nothing else mattered at that point. I wasn't afraid anymore. I got to meet my child for the first time, and it changed everything. I was a mother to be.
Your gift of $140 will cover the cost of 5 ultrasounds. All donations are tax deductible, and 100% of your gift goes to saving babies. To donate, dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby, or donate securely at preborn.com. Your love can save a life.
A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Recently, tech titans have sought to minimize the access people have to conservative content. But what we've seen so far is just the beginning. At an off-the-record event where the usual regressive media suspects were gathered, Mark Zuckerberg announced Facebook will dial up the intensity of its efforts to minimize access to, quote, controversial political content, end quote. Any wonder as to what type of content Zuckerberg deems to be controversial?
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Glad to have you in the conversation today. Again, our guest, Chris McDaniel, candidate for Senate from the state of Mississippi, will be, for the United States Senate, will be our guest at 1:30 today. Let's grab a couple of sound bites about this Israeli-Palestinian brouhaha on the border there. And again, the left-wing media, I mean, it is shameful, ladies and gentlemen, the way that the mainstream media is handling this event. They are presenting this as if the Jews were out for a peaceful picnic in a neighborhood meadow, and the Jewish snipers just started firing at them without cause, without reason, without provocation from cover. Here's the heading from the New York Times today. Here's the heading: Israelis kill dozens in Gaza. Israelis kill dozens in Gaza. That is the headline from the New York Times. And you would think from this that rather than exercising restraint, which is what the Jewish forces have done, they've held themselves back, they've held off, they have not been premature, they haven't initiated any of these violent clashes, these violent confrontations. You would get the impression that this is just the Israelis teeing off with no provocation and killing innocent Palestinians, unarmed, innocent, peaceful lambs in the woods, killing them willy-nilly and at random, as if there was no violence in the West Bank, as if there was no violence in Jordan, as if there are no protests in the Arab street, and as if Hamas was not urging its militants to attack Israel. Hamas is behind all of this. They're the ones that are provoking this. They're pushing this. They're urging their people forward. These are people, Hamas, who refuse to recognize that Israel even has a right to exist. And here's how the New York Times covers it. Israelis kill dozens in Gaza. You know, the impression you would get from this is that the New York Times, they are siding with Hamas. They're siding with the jihadists that want to exterminate Israel from the face of the map and would love to do the same thing to the United States if they had the opportunity. So the interesting thing seems to be that the left is willing to recognize that every country on the planet except for Israel and the United States has the right to defend its borders. In other words, they're all up in arms over Israel. They're falsely claiming that Israel is transgressing into Palestinian territory when they go into the Gaza Strip. Like the Palestinians have every right to protect their sovereign border, that it's inexcusable that any Israeli forces would cross that international border. They've got a right to protect themselves. Israel is the aggressor by crossing the border. So they'll say that about everybody but the United States and Israel. We apparently are the only two nations in the world who do not have the right or have the authority to protect and defend our own borders. So that's the New York Times siding with terrorists. It's pretty clear, pretty evident. You know, and yet we've seen that it's not a nonviolent attack. In fact, listen to this story. Let me grab that. This is from Jihad Watch. A Palestinian boasts to NPR. NPR is over there covering this story. And here's what this Palestinian, a young Palestinian man, told National Public Radio today. This was today, about putting swastikas on incendiary kites and flying them into Israel. That's what they do. So they've got these kites. These kites have the swastikas on them, and they tie Molotov cocktails or whatever to these kites. They float them into Israel, so they drop down. And Jeff, you said they were designed to ignite fields and burn them to a crisp. So here's what the story says from Washington Free Beacon. A young Palestinian man boasted to National Public Radio on Tuesday about putting these swastikas on incendiary kites and flying them into Israel, saying, quote, that Jews go crazy, end quote, when they see it, and, quote, we want to burn them, referring to the Israelis. So Palestinian said through a translator who was holding a homemade white kite, this is a kite that's going to the Jews. So it's an incendiary kite. It's designed to catch fire. It was decorated with writing claiming Jerusalem for Palestinians and embroidered and embellished with swastikas, the symbol of Nazism. And so Steve Inskeep, the NPR host, he says, why did you put that on there? Why did you put that swastika on there? Because the Jews go crazy for Hitler when they see it. The Israelis know that people are flying kites with swastikas. They know this, and they use it to discredit you, to say this shows you're bad people. What do you think about that? The guy said this is actually what we want them to know, that we want to burn them. So that's one of these peaceful protesters that the New York Times is talking about.
Yeah, and let's not forget, Brian, this Gaza was part of Israel at one time, and they were promised peace if they would give that back. Do you remember? There was no border there. There was actually Muslims living. I believe Israel is the only place where a Muslim can live in a true democracy.
Right, yeah, and there are 1 million Arabs that are citizens of Israel. There is not a Jew anywhere in the Muslim world that is a citizen of a Muslim country.
Yeah,
not one, not one anywhere. And
there was no Hamas yet.
Yeah.
Well, there was Hamas infiltrators there, but they weren't the part of the elected government.
Well, you know, in fact, when they wanted to give Gaza completely to the Palestinians to control, they told the Jews they had to relocate to Israel, and if they wouldn't do it, the Israeli army would go in there and uproot their own people.
I remember
they
that.
would physically uproot Jewish people from their homes in the Gaza Strip and physically transport them back inside or back to the land of Israel.
And that was supposed to bring peace. Instead, they get burning tires, flying kites with bombs and rockets being fired, tunnels being built. That didn't work out.
That did not work. Here is a senior Hamas official. He said, look, this is not peaceful resistance. He says, this is senior Hamas official Mahmoud al-Zahar. He said, this is from freebeacon.com, he said the riots on the Israel-Gaza border are, quote, not peaceful resistance, end quote, but rather are supported by its, quote, military force. He says, has the option of armed struggle diminished? No. On the contrary, it is growing and it is developing. So he is saying clearly that this is not a peaceful resistance. We're prepared to back this up with our military. So once again, you see that this whole business about these being peaceful protesters who are being gunned down by these vicious and cruel and savage snipers from Israel is completely bogus, completely untrue, completely out of alignment with the facts on the ground. Nikki Haley this morning at the UN said, look, about Israel, there's no country in this chamber who would act with more restraint than Israel is showing. And she said, look, the problem is not this embassy. The problem is that you have people there who reject the existence of Israel anywhere. They reject the existence of Israel in any location, so they don't want an American embassy anywhere in any location. So it's just an excuse for them to start lighting fires. So again, we see that this just a myth that these Palestinians are just peaceful in their protests. Let's grab, first of all, let's grab Bibi Netanyahu. This is clip R1, talking to CBS Evening News anchor Jeff Glor in Jerusalem last night.
They're pushing civilians, women, children into the line of fire with the view of getting casualties. We try to minimize casualties. They're trying to incur casualties in order to put pressure on Israel, which is horrible.
You said they want kids to die.
Yes.
Putting kids in the line of fire.
Yes.
Did your army go too far?
I don't know of any army that would do anything differently if you had to protect your border against people who say, we're going to destroy you and we're going to flood into your country. You try other means. You try all sorts of means. You try non-lethal means, and they don't work, so you're left with bad choices. It's a bad deal. You know, you try and you go for below the knee, and sometimes it doesn't work. And unfortunately, these things are avoidable. If Hamas had not pushed them there, then nothing would happen. Hamas holds responsibility for doing this, and they're deliberately doing it.
So Bibi Netanyahu says, look, this is the fault of Hamas. This is exactly what Nikki Haley told the UN this morning. Hamas is at fault. And I didn't even know this before, but apparently they were shooting below the knee to just try to disable these people. Well, you take any kind of training in self-defense, you know, you aim for center mass. You're trained to aim for center mass. You're not aimed to wound. That's a good way to get yourself killed. So they even tried that. That's an example of the kind of restraint that the Israeli military is showing.
And he's absolutely right by them putting children in. And the big media story, the international media is paying attention to an 8-month-old baby that was killed by tear gas while there. But, I mean, what kind of mother brings an 8-month-old baby into an area where tear gas is being used, where there's violence and burning tires and gunshots?
Yeah.
I mean, where is the mom to blame in that?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, she did it intentionally.
Yeah, you know, and they practice a religion that teaches them that their own children are perfectly expendable. Yeah. They pride themselves on sending their kids off to blow themselves up for Allah.
Yeah, I need to correct that. I didn't mean that she deliberately intentionally killed her kid. I'm saying she intentionally brought her kid
made a
there.
decision to put her child in a place where death was certainly possible, if not even likely. One more clip. So we heard Bibi Netanyahu. He's the president. He knows what's going on there. Look, this is all Hamas. We've been as moderate, as restrained as we possibly can. We even started shooting below the kneecaps to try to disable them instead of kill them. It did not work. They just keep coming. And so at this point, we had to resort to lethal force to protect our borders. So they're perfectly willing to use their military and use lethal force to protect their borders against this invasion of people that have no right to cross the borders. You know, you start thinking about our southern border, and we've got an invasion coming across our border. You know, and Donald Trump has sent the National Guard down there, but unarmed. I mean, they're not in an armed capacity. They're in a backup capacity. Border Patrol, the only ones that are armed. Let's quickly play this. Let's run this clip. Clip R2.
Do you believe, as many human rights groups, American, Israeli, Palestinian, European, are saying that the IDF snipers shooting kids, people in wheelchairs, are those war crimes?
Well, they're terrible actions, period. And I think, what the United States should be doing, and of course the Trump administration is doing exactly the opposite, is instead of applauding Israel for its actions, Israel should be condemned. Israel has a right to security, but shooting unarmed protesters is not what it is about.
This is Dr. Richard Land, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. This week is National Police Officers Appreciation Week. In 1961, John F. Kennedy signed a proclamation designating May 15th as Peace Officer Memorial Day and the week in which the date falls as Police Officers Week. Let's honor all of our police officers across the land this week, starting with the officers in your local community. Let's remember that on average, one law enforcement officer is killed in the line of duty every 53 hours. Since the first known line of duty death in 1791, more than 19,000 U.S. law enforcement officers have made the ultimate sacrifice to protect your freedom and your safety. Each day, when a police officer goes to work to protect each one of us and our families, they are putting their lives on the line. In all of our towns and villages and cities, they are indeed the thin blue line between us and barbarism and violence. They are on the front line, defending civilization, peace, and decency every day. There are many ways to pay tribute to police officers and to the families of those that have lost their lives in the line of duty. Let them know that you appreciate them. Let their families know. Personally thank them. Thank their families. Tell them that you're praying for them. You might even think about writing them a note or paying for their meal if you see them in a restaurant. I know that the police officers and their families will very much appreciate knowing that you value and appreciate what they do in keeping us all safe in our homes and on our streets. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio. Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio, and I am your congenial, convivial, and amiable host, Brian Fisher. Glad to have you in the conversation. Speaking of congenial, convivial, and amiable, I'm pleased to welcome to our Focal Point studio, live and in person, in living color, Chris McDaniel. Chris McDaniel is a state senator in the great state of Mississippi, my adopted home state. He's also a candidate for the United States Senate. And I understand, Senator McDaniel, that we have in Mississippi a jungle primary.
That's right.
So describe for our listeners what that's about before we get into the issues.
Well, basically, it's a special election. It's going to take place in November, and all the candidates who have qualified will be a part of that election. The top two will advance. That's assuming, of course, that one individual doesn't get 51% of the vote, which is a fairly safe assumption. So the top two individuals will advance to a 3-week runoff just after that. So coming up in November.
Okay, so let me get this straight.
Right.
Before you can get to Washington and help drain the swamp, you got to run through the jungle.
It's never easy.
I mean, they're not making this easy.
It's never easy, and they evidently don't like me very much either. Have you noticed?
Yeah, that's pretty evident.
Yeah.
So, and Chris, I wanted to talk to you, Senator McDaniel, about some of the issues that you would be dealing with as a senator. Again, some of this is kind of an if-then thing. You know, there are no guarantees here. But I think listeners and voters would want to know, if you got to D.C., what would be your priorities? What would be your major legislative concerns? What are the things that you would like to deal with when you get back to D.C.? And I wanted to ask you a couple of specific questions. Donald Trump talked about his agenda yesterday, what he wants to accomplish. And I want to start, this actually wasn't on his list, but he's talked about this frequently. And that's this thing, I just call it a fake-a-buster. That's where you have to get 60 votes to get cloture on an issue. And, of course, that just cobs everything up. Nothing gets through the Senate because you got 51 Republicans. They need 9 Democrats. There aren't going to be 9 Democrats that are going to cross the aisle to vote for anything that Donald Trump likes. The stuff they've gotten through, you know, Neil Gorsuch, they got him through with 51 votes because they changed the rules. Same deal with the, with the budget. So, or the tax reform bill, rather. So where do you stand on this fake-a-buster thing, and where do your opponents stand as far as you know?
It's really simple stuff. 51 votes should be sufficient. A simple majority should be sufficient. The founders placed in our Constitution a handful of supermajority requirements. They did not place that into the Senate voting rules and regulations. That was done later. Now, here's the thing. Ultimately, there's an argument to be made. They claim that this 60-vote requirement is counter-majoritarian, that it slows down the mechanisms of government. That's not accurate. That's not practically the way it's happened. Right now, by virtue of that 60-vote requirement being in place, we can't reform government. And consequently, government's on auto drive. Debt, deficits, loss of civil liberty, the inability to repeal Obamacare, the inability to pass anything Donald Trump wants passed, all because Mitch McConnell holds on to a silly 60-vote requirement in the Senate. All he has to do is to become the man he claims he is, to be the real conservative he claims he is, and let's pass this legislation and save this republic.
So let me ask you this question, see if you're willing to go on record here. Why do you think that Senator McConnell will not do this? I mean, this is something that's obvious to everybody. Why won't he do this?
They like having a built-in excuse for the status quo. Mitch McConnell, Washington, D.C., they have no intention of draining the swamp. They have no intention of working with Donald Trump. They want to keep things as they are. How do we know this? Well, Mitch McConnell has made a fortune in Washington, D.C. He's empowered himself at our expense in Washington, D.C. Of course he doesn't want things to change. So he keeps this artificial rule in place that prohibits reform. Then they're able to lean back and say, golly, gee whiz, if we just had 61 votes. Well, you know what? You've got the votes to change it right now, but you like to have the built-in excuses. Our country is dying. We have the greatest country in the history of the world, and the debt alone is going to challenge our very survival. We have to have fighters that will go to Washington, actually put the Constitution back in its place. Article 1, Section 8, that's where the powers are. If we exceed those powers, we've gone too far. Find a way to govern responsibly again. And we can't do it as long as Mitch McConnell is insisting on this 60-vote filibuster requirement.
You know, and, it's kind of aggravating, but, Senator McDaniel, we've talked about this before, and we've reviewed this. I won't rehash it in too much length, but the Republicans told us, well, look, we can't do anything without the House. So we gave them the House in 2010. And then they said, well, you don't understand how things work here in Congress. You have to have the Senate. We can't just do it with the House alone. So we gave them the Senate. And then they said, well, you don't understand. You got to have the Oval Office, too. So we gave them the Oval Office, and here we are stuck with nothing to show for the last 2 years of the Trump administration. And now they're out there saying, well, just give us 9 more senators, and we have 60. Well, 51
they have enough.
Ought to be enough.
It's more than enough. We have fallen for this mess long enough. We've elected Republicans, but we haven't elected conservatives. And my party, the party I love so much, is no longer the party of Reagan. I fell in love with Reagan back in 1984. I'm a lifelong Republican. I'm a Taft, Goldwater, Reagan guy to the core. We've abandoned those principles. Oh, sure. We give it lip service. We talk about it in press releases. But when it comes right down to governing the way we're supposed to govern, we always compromise. We always surrender. My point is this: enough compromise, enough surrender. We have nothing left to give up. We have nothing left. Not in the culture war, not in the fiscal realm. We have nothing else to give up. So when I hear these excuses, and they're built-in excuses to maintain the status quo, instead of doing that, let's change it all.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm looking at a piece here from Politico about a proposal that Rand Paul is going to bring forth. In fact, it's actually supposed to be voted on this week. It's a balanced budget proposal that would reduce federal spending by $13 trillion, balance the budget within 5 years. The spending cuts are so steep that its plan is unlikely to pass. Apparently only needs 50 votes to move forward, so it must be exempt from whatever. But again, make no cuts to Social Security, but it would direct the federal government to make major reductions in spending without specifying the cuts.
Right.
So what do you think of that balanced budget approach, and do you think there's a better way to go at it?
Naturally, I'd like to see more details, but to your point, yes, this country needs desperately a balanced budget amendment. The politicians have proven they cannot live within their means. They're always going to want more, always going to ask for more, always going to demand more. At least we force the government back into its contours if we have some sort of balanced budget amendment. Now, the language of it has to matter. And I've seen a number of plans out there that could conceivably work, one of which is just this. You've probably seen this. It's like if I'm asked to balance my budget at home, and the only request that I received to balance my budget was to take 1 penny each year and set aside. Just 1% of my budget each year and set aside. I could do that pretty effectively. If that's the case, why can't the federal government? And that's a plan that's floating around right now. We're talking about 1 penny. 1 penny set aside each year.
Balance the budget in a matter of 5, 6, 7 years.
In just a few years. So we're not asking for draconian or chainsaw type cuts. We're talking about using a scalpel. Just 1 penny out of every dollar, set it aside, and let's begin to think about the future for a change.
Now, one of the problems that Donald Trump has been complaining about is his difficulty in getting nominations through. Nominations are completely cobbed up, and of course the Senate is the body that approves the nominations first in committee and then the Senate floor. What's cobbing up these nominations, and what can be done about it?
Leadership. It's leadership. Mitch McConnell doesn't like Donald Trump. Mitch McConnell wants to keep things as they are. So we have a system here where Trump is being forced to fight against members of his own party, against the established press, against the regulatory agencies that have been created by Congress, and everywhere President Trump looks for help, he can't find it because Washington is finally pushing back. They don't want to change. They don't want the swamp to be drained. And so it puts Donald Trump in a very precarious situation. All we're asking is that we send President Trump fighters. If he gets the fighters he needs, he won't have to beg Mitch McConnell for permission. If he gets the fighters he needs, he can tell Mitch McConnell how it's going to happen. Let's give him the freedom to do that with real conservatives instead of these pretenders that we have there now.
What about wall funding? Donald Trump's complaining about wall funding. He's meeting, I think, today with senators and representatives on Capitol Hill to talk about wages and to talk about immigration. He's asking for wall funding. Yeah. He didn't get it. What do you think ought to happen there? One
of the most frustrating moments of this last big omnibus bill, and even the bill before, was this. Somehow this government can find hundreds of millions of dollars for Planned Parenthood, a disgusting organization. Somehow this government can find hundreds of millions of dollars for building a border wall. I'm sorry, for sanctuary cities. But it can't find a single dime to build a border wall. And have we considered that for a second? We were promised a border wall, weren't we? And we were promised that if we deliver the House and the Senate and the presidency, we would get our border wall. Here we are, still nothing. But instead, all of these old pet projects like Planned Parenthood all the way down to sanctuary cities are still being funded. It just takes courage. Somebody's got to stand up and say we've had enough of this system. And right now, we don't have enough of those people fighting for change.
Let me ask you, coming to the end of our time here, talking here with State Senator Chris McDaniel, a candidate for the United States Senate in the state of Mississippi jungle primary on November 6th.
November
6th.
And
then 3 weeks later, there'll be a runoff if nobody gets 51% of the vote. So that's where things stand. I'm looking here at a picture of one of your two opponents, Cindy Hyde-Smith, being here greeted and congratulated by the head of the Democratic Party in the state of Mississippi. This is just taken on March 20th of this year. So Cindy Hyde-Smith, a former Democrat, I'm looking at her voting record, and this is something I'll ask her about when she comes on the program, if she accepts the invitation, because we will invite her to come on the program. But she voted in Democratic primaries up through June of 2010,
right,
and then switched party affiliation. So what concern should voters have about that?
Well, going right to the heart of the vote she cast in 2008. Now, bear in mind, she wasn't...
Got 30 seconds here, Chris,
by the way. She was voting in a Democratic presidential primary. So in 2008, she either cast a vote for Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama. And that's consistent with her record. She is a lifelong Democrat. She's been a Democrat her entire life. Through Mondale, through Dukakis, through Gore, through Clinton, through Obama, she was a Democrat. I've been a lifelong Republican. That's a big difference there.
My guest has been Senator Chris McDaniel. And Senator McDaniel, where could people go just to get more information about your campaign?
McDaniel2018.com. It's McDaniel2018.com. We're on Facebook and on Twitter as well.
Okay. McDaniel2018.com.
Yes, sir.
For more information. All right, Senator McDaniel, as always, a pleasure to have you on the program. I hope to stay in touch with you as the election, the campaign continues, and may God's will be done in all of this.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Okay, we'll be right back with your phone calls. Love to know what you think about my conversation with Senator Chris McDaniel. 888-589-8840.
Now that will be new, won't it? We look around us today at the old heaven and the old earth. There's not a whole lot of righteousness in this one, is there? But the Bible says that the earth will be filled with righteousness when it is recreated by our God.
Join Dr. David Jeremiah for his series Escape the Coming Night, next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
Women and men alike find themselves in despair after an abortion. Every woman who had an abortion was for a short time a mother, every man a father. But afterwards, they're all people in pain, anger, sadness, relationship problems. These often accompany an abortion. But there is hope. Call 866-482-LIFE. Your call is confidential, and you'll be talking with someone who has already been where you are and found the way out. 866-482-LIFE.
Hi, this is Steve Tiber with 8 Days of Hope. We've been all over the country helping disaster victims who lose everything.
It's truly a blessing. I really don't have the words to express.
And yet, they see a glimmer of hope when a volunteer shows up.
Building the home, that's the second reason we're here. The number one reason is to share the gospel and give them hope.
It's everything that's right in America. I mean, it really represents the best that we have to offer.
That's one of the main reasons for doing it, is being able to be the hands and feet of Jesus and coming out and working with so many wonderful volunteers.
I just feel like it's important in this day and age to teach a child how to serve.
Please go to our website, 8daysofhope.com, and click on Get Involved, submit your email address, and the next time we go anywhere with a disaster, we'll invite you to come along as well.
I love coming in the job room because you can see these pieces of paper. They aren't just a piece of paper. Right. It's a family that's hurting, and it's a gospel opportunity.
You know, I just thank God, for this moment. I mean, I'll be back in my home, and I know it's going to be awesome.
Come love others with 8 Days of Hope.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Hi, and welcome back. Focal Point. Brian Fisher is my name. American Family Radio Network. Glad to have you back. We'll take your phone calls. The number to call is 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840. Just concluded an interview with Mississippi State Senator Chris McDaniel, who's a candidate for the open seat, opened by Senator Thad Cochran's. Well, it's not an open seat. What am I saying? Governor Bryant appointed Cindy Hyde-Smith to serve in Senator Cochran's place until this election takes place. But Senator McDaniel's thrown his hat into the ring. Other declared candidates, Cindy Hyde-Smith, who's been the Commissioner of Agriculture in the state of Mississippi, I think since 2011, and Mike Espy, who's a former member of a Democratic administration, I believe the Clinton administration, as in the agriculture department or something like that. Anyway, got at least two opponents in the race, one Republican, Cindy Hyde-Smith, and one Democrat. Love to know what you think of the conversation with Senator McDaniel, what you think of him. This is especially relevant to people in the state of Mississippi who are going to actually have to cast a vote. But you may be in another state, and maybe you like what you hear, or maybe you don't like what you hear from Senator McDaniel, so you're welcome to weigh in as well. Number to call is 888-589-8840. Let's start by talking to TJ in Oklahoma. TJ, welcome. What's on your mind?
Well, Brian, I just want to thank you for taking my phone call.
You bet.
The reason I called is you said at the beginning of your show you were talking about another judge, getting, saying that Donald Trump can't do this. I ever since Donald Trump's been elected, and I've been, I listen to y'all on my way to work and everything, and I wish that Donald Trump, at the very beginning of all this stuff, would have invited the judge that said, hey, you can't do that. Okay, well, hey, you come to Washington and sit down with me and we'll talk. Whenever he got there, he should have said, okay, you are a judge for this district or this area, right? Okay, I'm the President of the United States. Are you a judge for the United States? No. So go back and you judge and you use your judicial power and everything in your area, and you leave the United States area stuff to me. Yeah. That's what I wish.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something else that I would even wish more strongly than that, and this goes back to Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson believed that in terms of deciding what the Constitution meant, every branch of government had the right to decide for itself what the Constitution meant for their area of responsibility. They don't answer to the other branches of government. Their job is to look at the Constitution, to understand it, and apply it as best they can to the responsibilities that they have in their branch of government. And this is what I would like to see happen, where Donald Trump would say, look, I've looked at the Constitution just like you have, and it doesn't give a federal judge at any level, let alone a little tin-pot district judge, lowest level of the federal judiciary, it doesn't give them any authority to dictate military policy, any authority to dictate immigration policy, none, zero, zip, nada. So I don't have to pay any attention to your rulings. You have no authority to make those rulings, and they're just opinions anyway. They're not the law of the land. They're not the law of anything. So I'm going to go right ahead, and I'm going to enforce and implement our policy, because our understanding of the Constitution is that it does not prohibit in any way what we are prepared to do. So that's what I would like to see the president do, just get right after it and do what Thomas Jefferson said, which is that each branch has the right to decide for itself what the Constitution means. All right, let's see if we can grab a call from Lori in Carbondale. Lori, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me. Lori, are you there?
It's Mary.
Yeah, there you go, Lori.
No, my name's Mary, and I was just going to say that I listen to another Christian stations sometimes, and it's like I do you guys, and they're advertising that saying that botforhillsdale.com, you can talk to that school and you can get a free online course for the Constitution 101, and they teach about the Constitution, and it's free. And I also wanted to say that I apologize to Mrs. Trump that we as a public, not everybody, has not given her the prayer and the support she needs while she's in the hospital. Before her, any First Lady would get support from the media and everything. And I want to apologize to her on air, and I wish her well, to be well and back with her husband soon. And there's also a song called 4 Days Too Late that will tell the story about Lazarus and his being brought back to life by Jesus. It's a real good song. I heard it last month on Exploring the Word. So I just wanted to say all that real quickly.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mary. An excellent call. Thank you very much for that. And speaking of Melania, you might have heard that she's in the hospital for minor kidney surgery. I don't know if any surgery that opens you up, I don't know if any surgery is minor, but she is apparently recovering. Senator Harry Reid is having surgery for pancreatic cancer, which is a very serious form of cancer. I mean, virtually every form of pancreatic cancer is fatal. But here's the interesting thing. Melania Trump and her husband Donald, they sent best wishes to John McCain while he was recovering in the hospital in Arizona. When Harry Reid and Melania Trump were in the hospital the same day, Senator McCain sent best wishes to whom? To Harry Reid alone. Conspicuous by her absence was any expression of best wishes from Senator McCain toward Melania Trump.
You know, I've always heard that surgery is minor when it's on somebody else but you.
Yeah, so. Never minor when it's on you.
That's right.
I can testify to that. All right, thank you, Mary. That is a great call, and she's right about that Constitution course from Hillsdale College. That's an outstanding course. You can take it for free. They're very, very, very good on the Constitution. It's just amazing the staggering level of ignorance in America about our own Constitution is really one of the things that's crippling us as a nation. And again, I even think that the Trump administration doesn't understand what Thomas Jefferson said. Look, each branch of government gets to decide for itself what the Constitution means for its area of responsibility, but it doesn't have the right to dictate their understanding for any other branch of government, and that would include the federal judiciary. So I think, my feeling is it's time for Donald Trump to exercise what the authority the Constitution gives him and forget this business of kowtowing to another branch of government. He doesn't have to do that. No branch of government has to bow the knee to any other branch of government. All right, let's go to Brett in Ada, Oklahoma. Brett, welcome. What's on your mind?
Well, I was wanting to say something. First of all, thank you for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
But secondly, about the issue this past week with Hamas at the border of Israel.
Uh-huh.
People are talking on the websites about how Israel overreacted to burning tires. I spent 11 years in the infantry, 6 years in Rangers, and 14 years in Special Forces. And people do that for a reason. We have even done so on the battlefield because burning tires make a very effective smoke screen from the drone cameras, the aerial video, as well as being able to block out the what you can see on the ground. Because a lot of the equipment that we use for enhanced vision, you can't see through smoke, especially thick smoke that you get from a burning rubber tire.
Well, that's
and
go ahead, Brett. Finish your thought.
I'm sorry. And the other part about the women and children, and I'll qualify this by saying I read this on Fox, but I haven't seen it on CNN or MSNBC or anybody like that. Having spent about 14 years in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, they had very little regard for the lives of children and women.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that we're fighting right now have a great tendency to put those individuals on the very front and to fire from behind, knowing that the only way you can defend yourself is if you have precision fire, which you can't do if you can't see through thick smoke, but you cannot allow yourself to take casualties. And because you can't see, it's there.
Yeah.
And that gives them a tactical advantage over the most sophisticated weaponry.
Yeah, because, Brett, they know that we have high regard for the lives of children. We have high regards for the lives of women. In fact, that's really why we go to war, Brett. I'm sure that's part of what motivated you. We're told that soldiers go to war not for what's in front of them, but for what's behind them. Their wives and their sisters and their mothers and their children, their daughters. And so that's what motivates us to go to war, to protect them. The last thing in the world we'd ever do as a Christian nation is deliberately expose them to danger. But that's not the mindset of the Islamic faith, is what you're telling us.
Well, I can't say about their faith. I've read parts of the Quran, but I've never read the entire book. So I can't say what they say about it from a religious perspective. But I can tell you, I don't care what religion someone is, if they're breaking in my house in the middle of the night and I'm there, there's a good chance they're going to be met by Mr. Mossberg.
Yes.
And I don't care what color they are, what religion they are. I don't care if they're a neighborhood resident. First of all, I'm going to make sure that they hear the rack on the gun. If that doesn't run them off, I'll do the best I can to say, are you in the right house? Maybe you're drunk. You came in and you couldn't get in, so you broke in through the window to get into your own house, and you're in the wrong place. But if they're coming in an aggressive posture, the next call is going to be to 911 to request ambulance and police support.
There you go. All right, Brett, listen, I appreciate your call, and thank you for sharing your knowledge from the battlefield and from deployment, 14 years in the Middle East. Thank you very much for that, Brett. Brian in Fairbanks, Freddie in Speedway, David, Michigan City. Hang on. I'll get to you right after the news. We'll be right back. Focal Point, American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
You can stay up to date with the latest in the culture war from the news team at onenewsnow.com. Our goal is to present the day's news from a biblical perspective. OneNewsNow.com not only features the latest breaking stories from across the U.S. and around the world, but also news of the challenges that Christians face today. Bookmark OneNewsNow.com.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Steve Pugh. The UN Security Council is meeting today to discuss the violence in Gaza that resulted in the deaths of at least 60 Palestinians yesterday. Tanya J. Powers has more.
Kuwait called for the Emergency Security Council session after the Palestinian deaths from the Israeli gunfire and mass protests on Monday, the same day the U.S. opened its embassy in Jerusalem. Responding to criticism of that move, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley said it was right for America.
It reflects our sovereign right to decide the location of our embassy, a right that everyone in this room claims for their own country.
The U.S. vetoed a Security Council resolution in December that would have required President Trump to rescind his declaration of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Haley also called out other Middle East violence today, saying today's focus only on Gaza is a double standard. In New York City, Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
There are more North Korean talks tomorrow. Greg Palcott has details.
Officials from North and South Korea meeting tomorrow at the Peace House along the DMZ, the scene of last month's summit involving North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in. The topic of tomorrow's talks, denuclearization. That, of course, is the focus of next month's summit involving President Trump and Kim Jong-un in Singapore. An advisor to the South Korean president saying today North Korea should give something big in those talks, that an incremental approach to denuclearization would not be acceptable to the U.S. or South Korea. And one more positive note from North Korea, the head of the UN World Food Program coming out of that country saying that everyone on the ground there is hopeful that he got unprecedented access and held open discussions all amid this ratcheted up diplomacy in the region. In London, Greg Palcott, Fox News.
A mother of 10 blasting torture charges against her and her husband. Lillian Wu explains.
Ina Rogers, who had 10 children removed from her Northern California home, is calling child abuse and torture charges against her and her husband ridiculous. She contacted authorities back in March to report her oldest child missing. That's when officers said they found unsafe conditions, including animal and human feces and spoiled food, on the floor of the house where all 10 kids, ages 4 months to 12 years, slept in one room. Officers also said the kids suffered puncture wounds, burns, and other injuries consistent with being shot with a pellet gun. The father was arrested Friday and is being held on more than $5 million bail. Lillian Wu, Fox News.
An organization aimed at putting a stop to predatory gambling will continue to speak out following a Supreme Court ruling. More from Chris Woodward.
The Supreme Court says states can legalize sports betting as the federal prohibition on state laws authorizing sports betting violates the anti-commandeering rule. The case involved New Jersey's attempt to legalize sports betting under then-Governor Chris Christie. For over half a century, most states have had laws on the books barring sports betting, but some states have started to view it as a potential to create jobs and generate revenue by opening up casinos and allowing sports betting to be legal. While the ruling in New Jersey's favor has been hailed a victory for federalism, Les Bernal of Stop Predatory Gambling calls it a naked money grab from the wallets of ordinary Americans cloaked as a states' rights case.
State-sanctioned gambling goes to the heart of the lack of mobility out of poverty that millions of Americans face today. The American people lost $117 billion on state-sanctioned gambling in 2016. It causes life-changing financial losses for millions of people. And so this national problem is going to be made far worse by allowing state governments to operate and advertise sports betting. And it's going to be especially harmful for kids. Studies from other countries that have legalized this scheme shows that kids are repeatedly exposed to harmful messages and advertisements about sports gambling. It normalizes gambling for kids.
I'm Chris Woodward.
The Commerce Department says retail sales increased 0.3% in April, down from 0.8% in March. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com and on the One News Now mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Kids can't wait for summer, but 3 days in you'll hear, "We're bored." Prepare now to beat boredom with the Torchlighters DVD series and activity book. Torchlighters is a set of 16 animated stories of heroes of the Christian faith. The companion Ultimate Activity Book contains fun, real-world activities with a devotional for each episode. Get the Torchlighters series now and do away with summer boredom. Visit afastore.net.
Don't tell me, don't stop me in the middle. Don't you dare, not 1 second.
I resent that. No, I do not yield.
We have seen an economy that's skyrocketed and is good for all Americans.
Don't you dare talk to me like that.
Not just white Americans or not white Americans, but all Americans.
I resent that.
These are red, white, and blue issues.
No, I do not yield not 1 second to you. Not 1 second. Not 1 second.
If we can't get away from this divisive type of talk, we cannot come together as a nation.
I resent the remark about making America great again.
What the president's done, I believe, in this year plus is get more done against greater opposition than anyone I've seen in my lifetime.
Don't tell me that we don't understand
The gentlelady will suspend.
Google Miss Waters and see what she's done in a lifetime.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged. An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy and welcome back to the second hour Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Great to have you in our conversation, regardless of how you are joining us. Live streaming us on Facebook, which you can do right now. We record the program as we stream it on Facebook. We upload it to our Facebook page there in complete version. We publish it with an extensive table of contents. You can find your way around the program. You can live stream us on YouTube. Don't forget to go to our YouTube channel, subscribe to it, click the bell in the upper right-hand corner. You'll get a notification every time a new live program of Focal Point begins. You can also listen on one of our 184 radio stations that comprise the American Family Radio Network. You can listen on the go by having the iPhone or the Android app. And do not forget that we got podcasts you can access. Got a lot of people, thousands of people follow us using the podcast function. You can also audio stream us through your computer by going to afr.net.
And I'm also working on getting together with some local judges for any liberals that break the law. As a form of punishment, they'll have to sit in a cell and listen to a week's worth of Focal Point. So just give me a little time. We'll get it worked out.
Okay, that'll get their minds right. They'll never want to disobey the law again. All right, a couple of quick items before we go back. We got some callers that are patiently hanging on. Let's get to them here in a quick second. A Zogby poll indicating that likely voters have more confidence in Donald Trump than in Democratic leaders to grow the economy, 41-35, Trump over the Democrats, and to keep America safe, 40-38. You know, no wonder Willie Brown from San Francisco, he's out there today saying, look, you guys just got to lay off Trump. This is a former mayor in California of San Francisco, Willie Brown, told Democrats, you want to win in the midterm elections, you got to stop bashing Donald Trump and focus on issues that concern the average voter. He said it may not be easy to give up making everything about Trump, but that's what a winning strategy encompasses. Like it or not, this is a quote, like it or not, a significant number of Americans are actually happy these days, said Willie Brown. He explained that people are making money, they feel safe, and they agree with Trump's trade policies, his call for more American jobs, and his stance on immigration. Here's what he said, quote, the jobs growth reports, the North Korea summit, and the steady economy are beating out the Stormy Daniels scandal and the Robert Mueller investigation in Middle America hands down. So, in other words, those issues simply are not resonating with voters, and he's telling Democrats, you got to get a message. You know, the Democrats had a 12-point advantage in January in the generic ballot. Now it's down to 4. That's virtually unheard of, for there to be that narrow a gap between Democrats and Republicans on the generic ballot. And remember, this is at a time when the beating on Trump is continuing without let-up and without mercy.
You know who else is getting tired of beating up on Trump as comedians? I think it's Jimmy Kimmel said he didn't even want to do Trump jokes anymore.
Yeah, we're done. We've exhausted that. We're getting bored with it. Everybody's getting bored with it. It's not working anymore. So that was the whole idea.
Trump's funnier in real life than he is by comedians anyway.
Well, and you know, the reality is the Democrats simply do not have a message. I mean, Willie Brown saying you got to find something that resonates with voters. They don't have a message that resonates with voters. That's why I think they're in big, big trouble for the 28 elections. All right, let's grab a call from Freddie in Speedway, West Virginia. Welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hi, Brian.
Hey.
I have 3 quick points.
Hit me.
Number 1, thanks for taking my call.
You bet. You're welcome.
Number 2, George Patton once said, a man doesn't become a hero by being captured. And number 3, I've liked what I've heard about Chris McDaniel even the last time he ran too. I'm afraid, though, that the swamp is liable to treat him like they did Judge Moore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they will try. I will flat out guarantee you, Freddie, they will try. We saw that actually in 2014, where they listened to 10 years of his radio program trying to find something that he had said that they could use against him, and they came up virtually dry. The ad they ran was really lame. It was just kind of stuff that was just kind of a nothing burger to anybody. So I don't know that there's anything there to get, Freddie. If there was something there, they would have found it in 2014 because they scoured that guy stem to stern. And one thing, Freddie, I'm quite confident that Senator McDaniel, if he makes it to the United States Senate, he's not going to bend, bow, scrape, compromise on his principles for anybody or for any reason. All right, Freddie, listen, I appreciate the call. Thank you for that. You know, General Patton also said you don't win a war by dying for your country. You win a war by making the other die for his country. All right, let's go to David in Michigan City, Mississippi. Welcome, David. What's on your mind?
Actually, I was going to talk about, I guess it was 2014, the last time McDaniel ran. And I was thinking it was for the House of Representatives, but it may have been the Senate. But either way, people outside of Mississippi won't know this, but you, I'm sure, having been here a while, will remember the Republican Party completely gave him the shaft in that election because he was not the establishment candidate. And there was even a lot of question whether or not he actually won the primary, and they just set aside the rules to go with the establishment candidate. Yeah. But I was just going to say, you know, I liked what I heard from him, and that's in contrast to just recently you prompted your listeners to call our senators regarding the thing with the time limit on how long they discuss
the debates
Trump
over
nominees.
nominations. Yeah.
Right. So I called both of my senators for that, and then right before that I had called encouraging them to vote for the confirmation of Mike Pompeo. And when I called Senator Wicker's office, both times they were extremely polite, repeated the information back to me, verified my name and my address, and gave me what Senator Wicker's thoughts on that, both of those issues were. Cindy Hyde-Smith's office in both cases, all I got was thank you, goodbye. And, I mean, it did not seem to me like it was a very friendly thank you, goodbye. That was my opinion, but it just seemed like they were trying really hard just to get me off the phone and had no interest in what I was talking about. So contrasting those two, I mean, to me, it's a very simple choice as to who I would vote for in that election.
Yeah.
So,
I appreciate the information, David, and that is important. That the kind of reception you get from a senator's office, because if you want to leave a message for the senator, you want some reason to believe that the message is actually being noted, it's actually being transcribed, it's actually being put down on paper, logged some way in which the senator can actually read your message. All right, appreciate that very much. Let's last call of the segment. Let's go to Brian in Fairbanks, Alaska. Brian in Fairbanks, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Good morning. I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine I have been helping. I am the longest serving aide to Schaefer Cox. That's spelled SCHAEFFER COX. You can Google that name. You can Google freeschaefer.com. Schaefer Cox was an up-and-coming rising political star up in Fairbanks, and he got 38% of the vote at 24 years of age in a three-way Senate race for state senator race.
Okay, Brian,
But
I got
he didn't win, so he-
I got about 15 seconds. Cut right to the chase as quickly as you can.
Okay, he is a political prisoner. He listens to this program. He's a political prisoner, not guilty. Google that name. Look up framed by the FBI.
Okay, Brian in Fairbanks, look up Schaefer Cox. Investigate his story.
Here's Twyla Brace, president of CCHF, with today's Health Freedom Minute.
California parents interviewed by a television reporter had no clue the state kept their child's DNA and weren't pleased. California began storing baby DNA in 1983. In the past 18 years, they've added the DNA of 9.5 million children. The state keeps it indefinitely and sells it to researchers for $20 to $40 per blood spot. The state created a 16-page brochure which doesn't mention the program until page 12. Most parents don't recall getting the brochure at the hospital, and 75% had no idea the state stored the DNA. But reading a brochure is probably not high on the to-do list of exhausted new parents.
Learn more about protecting your healthcare choices. Sign up for the CCHF Weekly E-News Update at cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
The American Family Association invites you to a very special gathering of AFA friends from across America this fall at the Big Cedar Lodge in the Ozarks. The AFA retreat will be a relaxing time of fellowship and inspiration. Speakers include Sandy Rios, Dr. Ray Pritchard, Todd Starnes, Abraham Hamilton III, and Ed Vitagliano, and Dennis Jernigan will lead us in worship. Experience all of this in a beautiful setting that dates back to the 1920s, built originally to be a wilderness retreat for a prominent Missouri family. We hope you'll join us October 8th through the 11th at the rustic Big Cedar Lodge just south of Branson on Table Rock Lake. It promises to be a refreshing time of worship, teaching, fellowship, and fun. To register or for more information, visit afafoundation.net. Seating is limited, so register today. Hope to see you there.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. You know, we just talked in the last segment about another Democrat. I mean, we've had Nancy Pelosi and I don't know how many others. We've played the sound bites. Stop talking about impeaching Donald Trump. Now we've got a Democrat, Willie Brown, saying don't even bash him anymore. It's not working. Too many people are happy. The tax cuts are working. People feel safe. They feel optimistic about America. They feel optimistic about the economy. Just stop bashing Trump and come up with a message that resonates with the American voter. And I think that's the problem. The Democrats just do not have a message that resonates with the average American voter. You know, and Donald Trump is out there saying, look, we've spent about $10 million on this Russia. I call it a snipe hunt because there's no snipe out there to get. He calls it a witch hunt. You know, but sometimes there's a witch out there, and you can hunt up a witch and you can find one. But there's no such thing as a snipe. Well, there is one, but you go on a snipe hunt, everybody knows there's no snipe except the people that are got their little lunch bags, their little brown lunch bags out there on the beach trying to hold them open. But it's $10 million.
Sounds like you've been on one or two.
Well, I think I might have been victimized one time, and then I had the pleasure of returning the favor to some other rookies. But anyway, it's a witch hunt, and Donald Trump has said they have spent $10 million on this witch hunt up to this point. So it's it's getting crazy the amount of money that they are spending on this. And Donald Trump says, my Rasmussen presidential tracking poll, his approval rating is at 47%. They're beating him to death, and they can't dent his approval ratings. His approval ratings continue to go up. The more they beat on him, the more his approval ratings go up. And the Democrats' advantage in Congress on the generic ballot is decreasing. It's down to 4 points now, which is almost within the margin of error. So that is not working.
There, Brian, do you mind me interrupting for a second for some breaking news?
Yeah, hit me.
I guess North Korea has announced it has canceled a high-level summit meeting with South Korea and is now threatening to cancel a meeting with the United States over American military drills, joint drills with South Korea.
Well, maybe their true colors are beginning to show. Everybody kind of wondered what they were going to do. It just seemed you had to pinch yourself to think that North Korea would do this. They've been so bellicose their entire history. So maybe that was just all some kind of they were just smiling for whatever.
But to me, it sounds like these kind of military drills would be set way in advance, probably even before they made their announcement of denuking.
If you find anything about Trump's response to what they're saying, let us know that. Here's a story about a Green Beret who got waterboarded just to point out that it's not torture. He's an ultimate fighting champion fighter. Tim Kennedy is his name. And he had his friend, he was a Green Beret in the military, had his friend waterboard him. He said, look, there's no permanent damage. It's just the fear of water that scares people. It's all psychological. It isn't torture because there is no physical injury. Remember, the definition of torture is physical injury. It doesn't happen. And he describes what the process is like. But he says, look, it gets you to talk because it's a scary sensation. It's pretty frightening to undergo it, and it'll get you to talk. But nobody's in danger of any kind of injury, any kind of lasting damage, or whatever. And Whoopi Goldberg challenged Donald Trump to undergo waterboarding since he supports it, and a former CIA interrogator said in response, "Who cares what Whoopi Goldberg thinks?" Well, I care what this former Green Beret thinks, and he says it is not torture. In fact, we've got Dick Cheney, I think, to the same effect here. 8. Okay, clip number 8. This is Dick Cheney, former vice president, and again served in the Defense Department for a number of years. Really knows what he's talking about. Here's what he says about waterboarding. Clip 8.
I'm not one of those people who calls it torture. An awful lot of people do, but it wasn't. It was set up in a way that what we did was, in fact, consistent with our fundamental statutes and agreements that were in place, and it worked. We were able, waterboarding was applied actually to only 3 individuals. One of those was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11. If you know, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is the mastermind behind all of this. If you know, he is number 2 to bin Laden in terms of the attack. If you know, he's probably the guy who knows more than anybody else except bin Laden what's next, what's their next target, how many people are they going to kill, and how are they going to do it. And then you tell me that the only method we have is please, please, pretty please, tell us what you know. Well, I don't buy that.
Well, I like Dick Cheney. I like the way he thinks. He's right about this. It is not torture. We looked at this thing very thoroughly. Our Justice Department determined that it is legal, and it is not torture no matter what anybody thinks. That is, we got a Green Beret went through it just to illustrate that it's not torture. So Dick Cheney, I'm with Dick Cheney on this one. And we only waterboarded 3 people. People think that we're waterboarding everybody that has brown skin or something. There was 3 people. This Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, number 2 to bin Laden, and we got information from him, according to Andy McCarthy, that prevented a jihadist attack on several West Coast targets. So not only is it not torture, it actually does work. Now let's go back, do some cleanup on what we've been talking about, some of the Palestinians. Let's go back to clip number 1. This is Raj Shah. He's the spokesman in the White House. And he's talking to NBC's Peter Alexander. This is actually a press briefing. Normally, Sarah Huckabee Sanders does these, Raj Shah filling in. And here's his exchange with NBC's Peter Alexander.
So to be clear, does the U.S. not agree with the French that Israeli authorities should exercise discretion and restraint?
We believe that Hamas is responsible for what's going on.
So there's no responsibility beyond that on the Israeli authorities. Kill at will.
What I'm saying is that we believe that Hamas, as an organization, is engaged in cynical action that's leading to these deaths.
He's exactly right. I mean, again, you see with NBC, you see that their entire template is that the Israelis are killing innocent men, women, and children at will with no provocation and absolutely no reason. Give you another example of the bias of the media. Here is the Daily News from New York. It's got a picture of Ivanka on the cover with this description, Daddy's Little Ghoul. Not Daddy's Little Girl, but Daddy's Little Ghoul, because she smiled at the ceremony that opened our American embassy in Jerusalem like everybody else did. But here is the subheading, 55 slaughtered in Gaza, but Ivanka is all smiles at Jerusalem embassy unveiled. So these people are just unconscionable, and, you know, calling her a ghoul and all that for just doing the job.
It'd be different if she was at the border smiling like that,
Yeah.
but she's nowhere near that. She's
Yeah.
at a formal event. It's celebratory.
Well, it's just, like you say, it is a celebratory event. 70th anniversary of Israel. Celebrate that. Our embassy finally moving to Jerusalem after 23 years of presidents ignoring the law. I mean, a lot to celebrate.
Yeah,
there.
they probably would have criticized her if she didn't smile. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, they say, well, what is she, some kind of sourpuss?
Yeah.
You know, this is a pretty happy day. All right, let's jump down to see where we want to go next. Let's go to clip number 2. This touches on what Willie Brown said about the fact that people like what's going on under Donald Trump, and the Democrats had better find some kind of message to counteract that, or they are toast in November. Here's Ed Henry, talking with columnist Michael Walsh about what Donald Trump has accomplished so far.
Yes, that's true. But in the beginning of the the famous 100 days, when all this legislation got passed, when things got done, what the president's done, I believe, in this year plus, is get more done against greater opposition than anyone I've seen in my lifetime, certainly. And all of this stuff.
So all of this stuff that Donald Trump has done, he's done despite very intense opposition. So Michael Walsh, political observer, says, look, he's gotten more done in 1 year against fierce opposition than anyone I've ever seen in my lifetime. Now, let's go to clip number 3. This is Mark Penn, who is a pollster for the Democratic Party, was a pollster for Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, so he's a Democratic operative with a capital D. And he's talking here with Jesse Waters about this special counsel observation. Again, we've got story after story about how the FBI had a spy in the Trump camp. And we don't have the identity of that spy yet. Sarah Carter believes that she knows, but there's evidence, quite convincing evidence, that they were spying on the Donald Trump campaign even before they used the Steele dossier to go get the FISA warrant. So here is what Mark Penn has to say to Jesse Waters.
Look, I spent a year fighting Ken Starr and saw on the inside how these investigations affect people trying to do their job in the White House or in political campaigns or in our democracy. Unless there is something really incredibly significant there, to continue and drag this on drags down the ability for people to do their job for this country. And you look at this thing, the origins of this thing have been suspect from the beginning. The Steele dossier, the Papadopoulos meeting, the Australian who may have been connected to the Clinton Foundation. This whole thing has been the fruits of a poisonous tree. What was originally sought after wasn't found. This is now 1998 all over again with an investigation somehow related to a porn star. Come on, we need to get a North Korea deal. We need to push back on the Iranians. We need a good economy. We cannot treat our White House, presidents, people working campaigns, and put them under this kind of Star Chamber investigation and expect our government to function.
You know, I think he's making a very valid point here. You look at the resources that have been tied up in this Mueller investigation, you know, the $10 million that have been spent, the drag on Donald Trump's attention and energy, the constant threat that hangs over him and members of his administration. And it's amazing because this is one of the things that he's had to overcome to get done. What he's done is really actually pretty phenomenal. that despite this relentless, unremitting pressure on him and criticism and accusation and threat and lawsuit and all this kind of stuff, that he's been able to brush it off his shoulders and continue to do what he knows he needs to do as president. And so Mark Penn, speaking as a Democrat, said, look, this thing isn't productive. It's just interfering with the ability of our elected officials to do the job that they need to do, which is to run this country. We'll be right back with a special guest talking about freedom of speech on college campuses when we come back. So stay with us and we'll chat with our special guest. Don't go anywhere.
In the book of Isaiah, the word tells us, "The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever." In the same way, without careful planning, your financial goals could blow away like the seeds of a dandelion. It's never too early or too late to consider how a charitable gift annuity can help you meet the financial goals you've set for your loved ones, your causes, and yourself. Give AFA Foundation a call at 800-326-4543, extension 345, or visit our website, afafoundation.net. Let us explain how a charitable gift annuity can help you achieve your goals. As we read in Proverbs, the plans of the diligent lead to profit. Our phone number again is 800-326-4543, extension 345. And our website is afafoundation.net.
Hi, I'm Will Addison.
And I'm Miki.
From Airing the Addisons on Urban Family Talk.
We'd like to invite you to the Marriage, Family, and Life Conference coming up August 17th and 18th.
The list of speakers is amazing. We'll have Ryan Baumberger of the Radiance Foundation, Dr. Clarence Schuler of Building Lasting Relationships, Abraham Hamilton III, Pastor Bert Harper and his wife Jan, Stacy Washington, Lonnie Poindexter, Pastor Dexter Sanders, and we'll be there too.
There's a direct attack by the enemy on marriage and family, and babies in the womb are treated like political footballs instead of life. We want to encourage and equip the body of Christ to fight for the restoration of the family. If we can get our families on track, a lot of society's problems could be solved. The Marriage, Family, and Life Conference is from Urban Family Communications, a division of the American Family Association. You can learn more and register at urbanfamilytalk.com.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Video segments of today's program will be posted at afr.net and on the Focal Point Facebook page. You'll also find the best collection of Brian's resources on our Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, be among the very first every morning to find out what the day's show will be about. Just follow Brian at Brian J. Fisher. Brian J. Fisher.
Hi, welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. One of the issues that we have been following, of course, is this Mueller investigation. And Donald Trump made a good point this morning. Look, my poll numbers are up despite this investigation. It's time to wrap it up. And he's saying, look, we spent $10 million and there's nothing. They have nothing to show. They spent $10 million of your money and mine, and there's no conclusion. No collusion. They haven't come up with anything. Now, here is Tucker Carlson talking about what may be motivating the Democrats, the helpless, incompetent Democrats. Clip 7.
More than anything, though, we've learned just how clueless the people who run Washington, D.C. are. Rather than accept the fact that they created Donald Trump themselves by abandoning and then coming to despise the rest of the country they run, they couldn't face that, so they concocted the Russia collusion story as a way to sustain a world where they did nothing wrong, and they only lost because their enemies betrayed this country to a foreign power. For more than a year, Russia was all they could talk about because they certainly didn't want to talk about the issues that got Trump elected in the first place. Drug ODs, a vanishing middle class, their agenda of literally replacing the people who live in this country with immigrants. They didn't want to talk about that. But it hasn't been working. For most of Trump's presidency, Democrats have looked forward to the big midterm wins that will give the control of Congress once again. That's the whole point of all of this. But it hasn't worked. Their lead is dwindling. It's now within the margin of error. They may not win back the House at all. And it looks like the Senate is going to be beyond their reach. Why? because the public has recognized that the Russia investigation is not what they said it was. It is, and it has been from the beginning, a witch hunt created by a cabal frantic to keep its hold on power.
Or a snipe hunt created by a cabal frantic to keep its hold on power. You know, and to me, it's a mark of desperation, the kind of obsession that the Democratic Party has had with this investigation, to me, is a sign they're revealing, I think, that they know they don't have anything else. If they can't get Trump with this whole Russia stuff, they're in big trouble because they have no fallback position. They've got no message. They have nothing else that they can turn to. They wouldn't be complete without having a soundbite that referred in one way or another to Maxine Waters, and we're not going to disappoint you. We have one. This is Representative Mike Kelly. Mike Kelly was the one that Maxine Waters had the shootout with yesterday. You know, Jeff had a little bit of that exchange in the open today where she's saying, I will not yield back, I will not yield to you 1 second. Started to sound like Dr. Zeus there for a while. I will not yield, I will not yield to you, I will not yield to you even 1 second, said Sam I Am. Anyway, so here's Representative Mike Kelly. He's on Fox and Friends this morning, and he's talking about kind of the backstory of what happened. And it actually, interestingly enough, began with automobile dealers. Let's listen.
There was a steady stream of Democrats coming down to the microphone and constantly berating automobile dealers, automobile people. These are people that I know so well, love so well, and have worked with for so long. This is absolutely preposterous. And again, it's about dividing us as Americans. It's not about uniting us. And when we go to things of saying, well, it's white versus non-white, it's man versus woman, that is so preposterous. And those are the type of things that divide us as a people. So it's appalling for me to sit and watch that. And I will tell you this, if people think it's okay to sit back and not say anything when you know it's not true, when you know it's an outright lie, when you know it's an outright attempt to divide us and say nothing, that is not being a stand-up American. You have got to stand up for all Americans, by the way.
So you have this one instance, because you know dealerships, that's where you made your money, and now you're now you're serving, and you still do. But do you think is this the first time Maxine Waters, you think, has brought up color unjustly?
No, I think that if you were to Google, no, listen, don't take my word. Google Miss Waters and see what she's done in a lifetime. You know, everything has always got to come down to discrimination, and somehow we're not treating non-white people fairly. We're discriminating against them. I would just tell you this: since this president came into office and this administration, we have seen an economy that's skyrocketed and is good for all Americans, not just white Americans or not white Americans, but all Americans. These are red, white, and blue issues, and if we can't get away from this divisive type of talk, we cannot come together as a nation. That's horrible. It's totally unacceptable.
All right, so Mike Kelly going to bat for the ability to have free speech without this divisive talk. You know, that's the point that he's making here. When you have Maxine Waters go off like she does, without cause, without reason, attacking people that haven't done anything to hurt anybody, but have only done things to help people, then it creates division where it's absolutely unnecessary. You know, Spike Lee is premiering his new movie in Cannes last night, and he said, I had to verbalize the hate. He's going back and talking about something that happened in the 1970s and said, I felt compelled to verbalize the hate. And he got a 10-minute standing ovation. He wants to keep hate alive. Instead of keeping love alive, instead of keeping civility alive, he wants to keep hate alive. Well, speaking of speech, let's turn to my next guest. Her name is Nicole Neily. She is the president and founder of Speech First. Nicole, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay, well, Nicole, we got just about 7 minutes here. Let's get as much done as we possibly can. Tell me what Speech First is about and about this lawsuit that you have filed.
Sure. So Speech First is a new campus-free speech organization. We're a membership organization because there's so much going on campus, it's hard to go more than a couple hours without hearing some new outrageous story. And we really wanted to capture the anger and the emotion that people have about it, not just students, but also parents, grandparents, alumni, just concerned citizens, people who love the First Amendment. Because we want to show students that to stand up for your rights on campus is the right thing to do, that there are hundreds of thousands of Americans who believe in this, and that there's strength in numbers. We want to show universities that, you know what, you should be scared and you really should respect these rights because people are angry. And so what we're doing is we're filing lawsuits against schools that have violated student speech rights.
Well, and you talk here about Michigan developing a bias response team, and a lot of colleges are doing this. So they are designed to kind of surface and rebuke instantly examples of bias on campus. At first glance, Nicole, it would sound like a good idea to have a bias response team. What's wrong with these things?
Sure. Well, our problem with it is that it's very vague and it's very overbroad. And so what it ends up doing is capturing a lot of speech that is protected by the First Amendment. Several of our members on campus, we have a number of students who are members, are afraid to talk about anything political because bias is the bias incident. The best way to judge if there's a bias incident is your own feelings. It says that a bias incident could be intentional or unintentional. It could be something that is criminal or non-criminal. And so you could commit a bias incident and be run through the kangaroo court system without ever knowing that you've done anything wrong or even meaning to do anything wrong, and something that in a court of law wouldn't be wrong. And so by having these terms that are very, very vague, anything political, from expressing a pro-life view, expressing a pro-Second Amendment view, expressing a view about identity politics or about the president, can get you in trouble. And we think that that's absolutely incorrect, and we think that the school needs to be held accountable for their policies.
Well, and if you've got somebody from this bias response team or somebody from the school administration knocking on your dorm door because you've been reported essentially as a hater for simply expressing a perfectly legitimate political point of view, that has kind of a chilling effect on the whole campus.
Exactly, and that's chilling is exactly the word that we use in our lawsuit, that it has violated students' First and 14th Amendment rights, and it has chilled their speech. They're afraid. They don't know what they can be in trouble for, and they don't know when they can be in trouble, because the bias response team actually has a mechanism. There is a portal on the website, on the University of Michigan website, where you can anonymously report speech that you just overhear. So you might be having a conversation with me. Somebody could walk by and hear us and say, I don't like that word he used, and they can anonymously report us. And we'd have to go before a committee that is made up of school administrators and campus police and explain ourselves. And if we are found to have transgressed enough, then we might be sent to something they call restorative justice, which is essentially a re-education camp. We might be sent to a couple hours of cultural appropriation training or diversity training or unconscious bias training to make amends for our sins. And, I mean, are you kidding me? That's not American.
Yeah. Well, and Nicole, I'm thinking, I was in Vietnam a number of years ago, and my tour guide there in South Vietnam, his father was a policeman in Saigon when the South fell to North Vietnam, and he said one day my father just disappeared, and we had no explanation, no reason, and he just disappeared for 2 years, finally showed up, and that whole time, because he was a policeman, therefore, they suspected him being part of the establishment there in South Korea. He was sent off to a 2-year re-education camp. We think in America, well, that could never happen here. We have the First Amendment, freedom of speech. But what you're saying is actually not that far from what my friend in South Vietnam experienced.
No, I mean, these are systems that we saw in East Germany. These are things you see in China where citizens report on each other. This has no place in America, much less on a college campus, where students should be expressing themselves, debating ideas, challenging each other, pursuing the truth. It may be unpopular speech, but that doesn't make it unconstitutional.
Well, in fact, it's not really free speech unless you have the freedom to say things that other people might disagree with. If
right.
You can only say things that everybody around you likes and agrees with, then you really don't have free speech at all. And the Constitution's pretty clear, it's free speech. And, I've studied that pretty carefully. And when it's talking about free speech in the First Amendment, that's political speech. That has to do with ideas. That has to do with concepts that may be controversial, need to be debated, need to be explored. And one last word here. Nicole, you would think that a college campus would be the place above all others where you would prize the free exchange of ideas. What's happened to our college campuses?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, as we've seen, the window of acceptable discourse is very, very narrow, and it is very, very far left. And so that's why there is just an orthodoxy that's on campus where students are really, there's only one way to think, only one idea. And if you stray from that, then woe befall you.
Our guest has been Nicole Neily. She is the president and founder of Speech First. fighting the good fight to protect free speech on our college campuses. You know, we always picture colleges being a marketplace of ideas. Well, increasingly, that's no longer the case in America. Well, Nicole, thank you for taking some time to chat with us. God bless you in your venture, and perhaps we'll have the occasion to talk again. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.
All right, Nicole Neily, president and founder of Speech First. Well, we'll take your calls. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840. Donald Trump this morning at the 37th Annual National Peace Officers Memorial Service calling for the death penalty for criminals who kill police. I'm with Donald Trump on that one 100%. Be right back.
To sharpen the biblical worldview of Christians and to share the good news of Jesus Christ. That is the mission of the Christian Worldview radio program. I'm host David Wheaton, inviting you to join us this Saturday morning at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, as we discuss all matters of life and faith from a decidedly biblical perspective. The Christian Worldview, Saturday mornings at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, right here on American Family Radio.
Who is God? What is He like? How can we know? Your answer to these questions will impact your worship, discipleship, apologetics, and evangelism. Learn from Ravi Zacharias, Josh McDowell, Chip Ingram, and more than 60 other speakers at Southern Evangelical Seminary's 25th Annual National Conference on Christian Apologetics. It's October 12th and 13th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Get the early bird discount when you register by August 1st at ses.edu.
Hi, I'm Jan Harper. If you're a pastor's wife like me, you probably know what it feels like to live in a fishbowl. You know, that feeling like everybody is watching your every move?
The annual AFA Pastor and Wife Fishbowl Retreat is 3 days and 2 nights of relaxation and building relationships. The retreat is hosted by Pastor Bert Harper of Exploring the Word and his wife Jan. Special guest speakers will include AFR morning personality J.J. Jasper and his wife Melanie. The AFA Fishbowl Retreat is set for October 9 through 11 at the Linden Valley Conference Center in Linden, Tennessee. Call 800-326-4543 extension 300 for registration and information. That's 800-326-4543 extension 300. Or visit repairingthefoundations.net. Registration is limited to the first 35 couples.
Get out of the fishbowl and into the AFA Pastor and Wife Fishbowl Retreat. We'll see you there.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Focal Point, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, welcome back with this last segment of Focal Point on today's edition. Glad to take your phone calls. Number to call if you want to join our conversation is 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840. You know, one of the things that I believe is true about liberals is that they're always lecturing us, and yet they seem to be completely clueless and blind to the reality that they are violating the very standards that they are imposing on us. Now, I want you to listen to this excerpt from Andrea Mitchell. She's delivering a commencement address at the University of Pennsylvania. And I think in reality, Andrea Mitchell is talking here. Andrea Mitchell from NBC News is talking about you and me, but in reality, she has hoisted herself on her own petard. Let's listen. Clip 4.
In today's politics, facts are described as alternative, and truths are often relative. Devices that we thought would liberate us can at times weigh us down. Social media that enable us to forge connections can at times be isolating. We can feel overrun by the velocity of information bombarding us day and night. And in a country more divided than at any time in recent memory, too often we retreat to our corners, becoming all too comfortable relying on news media that confirm our opinions rather than challenging our preconceived notions.
You know, what I would suggest that it is the left, regressives that are guilty of this. I mean, Andrea Mitchell is trying to tell us we need to get out of our little comfort zones and out of our shelters and out of our sleeping bags and wake up and deal with the real world. I would say that it's regressives are the ones that do not want to encounter any ideas they don't like. I mean, that's why we're having free speech squelched on campuses. There are people that liberal students just don't like. They don't want to hear them. They don't want to be bothered with them. They don't want to debate them. They don't want to consider them. They just want to shut them down. And so, you know, in reality, on this program, we deal with opinions that challenge our ideas. We play pieces from people who challenge what we believe all the time. We examine them, we deal with them, we respond to them carefully. I don't think the regressives spend 1 minute considering what conservatives have to say about contemporary life. Last clip today, let's go to clip number 5. This is Jeff Weaver, former campaign manager for Senator Bernie Sanders, and he's saying, if you're looking for a message that the Democrats want to send in 2018, Jeff Weaver says, I have it. Listen to this. Jeff Weaver, former campaign manager for Bernie Sanders, saying this is the message that Democrats need to run on in 2018.
See, but I think you saw the sort of spark of this in the campaign. And then I would also say on the policy side, you know, when Bernie started, he was at 3%, 4%, 5%. And he was talking about things like free public college. He was talking about universal health care. He was talking about $15 minimum wage. Well, those are all, you know, basically articles of faith in the Democratic Party now. And they were considered sort of out on the fringe at the beginning of that campaign.
All right, so now they're mainstream Democratic thought. Free college, well, not free. Somebody's going to pay for that, and it's going to be you and me. Universal health care, who's going to pay for that? Well, that's going to be you and me. $15 minimum wage. I mean, $15 minimum wage, where it's been tried, has been lethal. It's costing jobs in Seattle, for instance. They're shutting down restaurants there. Just does not work, and that is their message, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let's go to the phones. Let's begin with Kevin in Columbus, Ohio. Kevin, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
I just want to let you know that I've gotten in trouble in my office for telling stories or jokes, and I got in trouble one time for using the term dirt poor.
Wow. Now, did they claim that was racist or something?
They felt that the dirt poor was an inappropriate term to refer to a client. You know, just saying that they're so poor, they're dirt poor. And I ended up getting called into my supervisor's office each time, and I ended up just, you know, I ended up on the dirt poor one just saying, hey, this is a part of my vernacular. You know, I was raised by people that were, you know, coming out of the Depression, so that's part of my vernacular. You know, and the other things, you got to take the offensive sometimes. I took all these things and I put them on a naughty list, and I hung them up on my pod for Christmas time. And people really didn't grasp what I was doing, but as I was explaining it to them, like I got in trouble for jocularity, telling a funny story, and people looked at me like, really, you got called into the office for telling a story just because somebody heard you in passing? I said, yes, I have. So yeah, it's in the offices like this as well, not just the campuses.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the call, Kevin, and you're right. You know, we read stories about what's going on in the corporate world. I read a story about somebody who told a joke to a colleague on an elevator earlier this week or last week and nearly got fired over that. That's probably not a joke I would tell, but it's not a joke that would cause me to want somebody to lose their job over either. That's how ridiculously hypersensitive people have gotten in our day. Let's go to Roxanne in Mississippi. Roxanne, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brian. Good to talk to you. I just wanted to say something about the lady who was talking about the free speech on campuses and how it's not really free speech and they're challenging the students' rights. Well, all of this to me goes back to what's happening right now in our elementary schools, and that is the Common Core push. They intimidate and they degrade children to not speak and to do what they're told to do and to not have any voice in what's going on. And I'm just afraid that as time goes on, you're going to see more students that end up going to college, if they can get that far, being even more subservient to the liberals and their agenda. I was glad to hear Chris McDaniel on the air because I know he is against Common Core, and he's very aware of the problems that the kids are having in school and this liberal push for transgender and all kinds of things. It's just way over their heads. So I appreciate you having him on. I'm for him 100%, and I hope he wins.
All right. Well, thank you, Roxanne. Roxanne, I appreciate the call. And one of the problems with the way that the regressives have come to dominate the entire education system, you got to realize for a 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old kid, a teacher is like a god to them. I mean, they believe everything that the teacher tells them. So if the teacher is just delivering swill and bilge about racism or about discrimination or about human sexuality or about global warming, the kids are going to believe it. And then the parents have to detox their kids every time they come home from school. It just gets exhausting after a while. All right, thank you. Let's go to Catherine in Louisiana. Catherine, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi, I just wanted to relate a story regarding Miss Neely's platform there. And my daughter attends a very conservative Christian college in Texas.
Uh-huh.
And one of her dorm leaders had kind of decorated her door and said, we should be a school without labels. And she put all the names of all the different groups that, we all use and say, and then had a can on it that said illegal immigrant soup. Well, my daughter thought that was hysterical, and she took a picture of it and Snapchatted it. Well,
now what did it say?
It said, out,
Catherine, I just want to be sure I understand you. It said illegal aliens what?
Illegal immigrant soup.
Oh, illegal immigrant soup. All right, go ahead.
Right, okay. So she thought it was funny, took a picture, Snapchatted it. The dorm hall leader found out about it, was not happy, reported her to the director of the dorm. The director had her come in for counseling, asked her to write a paper, basically saying that she was sorry for doing that, and then had her roommate come in and basically, who is not, her ethnicity is not American, white American, it is another ethnicity, had her roommate come in and basically counseled her and said, we're just making sure that you don't feel oppressed or that you're feeling like you're being walked on or, that you're being treated poorly. We want you to know that you have somewhere to go just in case. And I was so appalled by that. I wrote they have a family that's kind of a resident family over that dorm. I emailed them. I never got a response. I emailed kind of a leader above that, the whole situation, never got a response.
This person that came in to talk to your daughter about the counseling that was available, was she saying this to your daughter or saying this to the woman of a different ethnicity?
The woman of a different ethnicity who was my daughter's roommate. And basically just, kind of quizzing her. Do you feel oppressed? Do you feel like you're being treated badly or poorly or, it was terrible.
Well, then I think the question
they're accusing my daughter of doing these things.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is, Catherine, sees your daughter is the one that was being abused and being oppressed for doing something perfectly innocent, something that shouldn't have offended anybody. If it did offend somebody, they ought to roll with that. That's a nothing deal. And so your daughter now is the one that is being treated as if she is being taken into custody by the Gestapo for daring to, speak her mind, but she didn't even say anything controversial. So, I'm sorry to hear about that, Catherine. This is at a conservative Christian school, you're saying?
Yes, it is. It's one that's very respected, and I really was so disappointed. I have been urged to, write the president of the school, and I don't know.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the call. I appreciate that, Catherine. And, one of the sad things, and Catherine's phone call reveals this, is how many of our institutions of higher education that were founded as Christian organizations or institutions have gone off the rails and have compromised with politically correct everything. Well, that's it for today. Do not forget, ladies and gentlemen, to bow low before God, stand tall before man, stand in the gap and never forget, with God's help, we are fighting a winnable war. See you tomorrow.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
There's a lot happening around us. That's why Christians need to stand strong on family values and morality. Hi, I'm Ray Rooney, editor of The Stand, a blog from the American Family Association. The Stand has timely, carefully written articles on relevant cultural issues that you can quickly forward to others. Visit